This is Bits and Pieces, the official podcast of Component Supply. I'm Kristin.
And I'm Mark.
And today, we're just going to jump into it. We're going to talk about mesh. Are you prepared?
I don't think I'm prepared for mesh.
It has more puns than probably any other product line, so it's going to be a problem.
I know. We're going to miss some, and they're going to judge us for it.
Yeah.
I know.
That's okay. If you are listening and you said, hey, you missed out on an opportunity for a pun,
that's actually why they should email us.
This is the only reason for this podcast. Anyways, so today we're going to talk about our mesh products. And what I love about our mesh components is that we are a resource for R&D. We love the medical device industry, but we support a lot of other industries as well. And mesh is one of those that is used everywhere.
It's woven into the fabric of all of our lives.
That's it. That's the one. Well done. Well done. Yeah. So you can look around your house and you can see it in your appliances. We can look down at our microphones and see it.
It's in all of our cell phones.
Yes. And it's very taken for granted.
It's very yes. And there's a lot of applications, right? So, obviously you think of it's filtration, it's separation, but there's acoustical applications. We've got this microphone has stainless steel mesh woven over, and there's multiple layers of different kinds of mesh for acoustical properties. So there's lots of properties and lots of areas that this material can be used in. Right.
And it trips people up a little bit, I think, because it has a lot of specifications.
Yeah.
And a lot of these specs affect each other. So if one changes, they all change. So we'll talk about that later in the episode. But people really know us for supplying R&D to the medical device community, particularly with tubing and wire. So we have tubing and wire. We have these fittings that accompany those products. And then you have this mesh.
Right.
So I feel like there's got to be a story here. I haven't asked you this before. Why do we even sell mesh? How does that make sense with our product offering?
So originally, if you go way, way back in the history before component supply, we've talked about small parts. And actually, this predates small parts.
Okay.
There was a gentleman that Dr. Murphy met at the hospital, and this man's wife was dying, and so she was in the hospital, and she had wounds. And he wasn't even in the medical field, but he was trying to find a way to, every time they would dress these wounds, she would be in so much pain. And so he was trying to find a way, a barrier that would allow wounds to heal, but that was sterile. And that's actually how a gentleman that did a lot of work in the catheter industry. In fact, most of us are doing what we do today because of his work. Met Bill Murphy was because Bill knew how to sterilize products, and this man was looking for a barrier for wound care to how to sterilize it. He was using mesh products for his wife. And so as they grew and did different work together, mesh became part of something that they always had. Yeah. And so that's how it wound up in the small parts catalog. And that's actually the history behind why we still stock it and know so much about it today. Not that we carry it because it has lots of benefits to the research and development world, but there's a little bit of sentimental value behind this material. We would keep it because of that.
Sure.
It finds its place in lots of applications. But that's how it wound up in the beginning. That the small parts group didn't say, "Hey, that's a good idea. Let's carry this filtration material." It had carried forward from that story.
That's great. I mean, a lot of times we don't know the reason why. We don't get to know. We don't get to know the end use of every component that we sell. But it is nice when you get to know history like that.
Right.
You can remember it. Just having access to a component, having access to a material to be able to come up with something better, a quicker diagnostic, a more comfortable procedure for the patient.
And when you look at products, you think, well, that's very simple, and yet this is a profound product. That was an application that made leaps and bounds over time. It was something that they didn't even work on eventually. Another group kind of took that thought process and for wound care and started moving that forward, but without access to the material to test with, this I don't know how, that would have taken a lot longer.
Right.
And so, we look at something that's used in an application like my cell phone or in a washing machine. And at the same time, we think about, my goodness, this is on an operating table as well.
Yeah.
And so it is a product line that's overlooked from its from its importance.
Right.
But also it's everyday use.
Yeah. And while what's on our shelf, it's not, a medical grade mesh. Like we haven't sterilized it or anything like that. It's really, for R&D. We can get into that with our manufacturers, but just off the shelf, we're testing, but for applications anywhere from that to those medical applications, but even, we have a lot of aquaculture and everything in between. So mesh is really everywhere. Take a closer look when you're looking around your house or you're in a store and see where it is. It's everywhere. And so we have a couple materials for it. So we have the nylon mesh filtration screen and we have a polyester. And so just kind of at the baseline for, a specification, you've got to pick a material.
Stainless? We do have some stainless.
We do have stainless. That's true. We don't have stainless up on our table today, but they're all woven meshes.
This is woven material.
Why is that important?
So in this world, you've got two kind of, I don't want to say structures. You've got a woven process and you've got a welded process. The welded process.
I don't even think about because I've only dealt in the woven mesh.
We don't deal with it because it's really not precise enough. So it's not a precision material. Where woven, you can control the pore sizes much more closely. The welded, you cannot. So we don't really deal with this. People see this, their screened porch is a welded product. It's not woven. Versus, like I said, some of these other applications that want to be very precise in its pore size. They're woven. That's kind of the difference.
Right. So usually at the end, I talk about lab kits that we have if we have them for a product that we're talking about. But I'm kind of cheating here and talking about it early because I pulled. We have these binder lab kits, and I pulled the biggest size from each of the 6 nylon mesh kits that we have. So it starts here. And I just want to use it as an example for talking about some of the specifications. I might get real creative and do like an overlay on our podcast of a photo. I know, but probably not because it's bits and pieces. It's supposed to be short and not too time consuming. But I have kind of 2 pieces here. So this is really the biggest size that we have. So this is a 1920 or UCMN 1920. So this is a nylon mesh with a mesh opening size that's 1,920 microns.
Yes.
So we're dealing with microns with mesh. So when people ask us, what sizes we have, there are lots of specifications. So we say, well, we base our specifications on the mesh opening size, which is the pore size, so the opening here. So I don't know how well they'll be able to see it against the background. But you can actually see an opening. You could measure this, with it without magnification. Like you could. It's not exciting, but
so you've got 1,900 microns, roughly 2 millimeters. It's a metric. It's a metric.
Definitely visible. On the other end of the spectrum, you have actually the smallest one. I have this tiny sample because it's very expensive, so I'm not going to waste a whole sheet. But you can't really even see. You can hardly see my fingers behind it. It looks like fabric. You don't think of it as being a screen, but people use this. And they want to buy very small quantities of it because it's wildly expensive. That's a woven mesh, and you cannot see the opening.
Yes. So which size is that? I'm sorry.
So this is a 7.
That's a 7. Okay. So now you're talking about an opening size that anything above 7 microns it's going to stop that.
Right.
7 microns is pretty small for something that's woven.
Right.
They make filtration that's smaller than that, but that process is not through a weaving process.
It's kind of like when we think about our HTX, our hypodermic tubing that's like 33 gauge is so small. And when I first kind of came into the industry, I thought, what in the world do people need to do with that? And it's a seller though. Like a lot of people are using the small materials, but just to get a difference, some people want this big mesh opening size, but just to look with this one. So you have You have a mesh opening, so you have a pore size. You can see through it. That's the opening. One that we also spec by, like in our charts, we call out an open area. And this is the one I think is confusing. We have a graphic where it's like, if you were to pull up all these threads this way and pull across them this way, the percentage that's left in a given area is the open area percentage.
Right. So, if you were to shove all these individual threads up to the top, it'd be a solid bar. And if you take all these and shove them over here, it'd be solid area.
Right.
And then you got this open area. And if you were to, figure out the percentage of that, that's the open area for the whole thing.
Right. So how much, the percentage that is open.
Right.
And then you have a thread diameter, which we're familiar with diameters because of our other product lines, and our listeners probably are too. So same thing there. It's literally the diameter.
The diameter of these little threads that are.
That's also microns, though.
It's called out microns. Yeah. Well, I mean, thank goodness they're not throwing 3 different measurements.
We don't need to.
Units of measuring.
Yeah, we don't need to mix imperial and
right. Let's
metric.
not do that.
So there's that. Threads per inch is another one.
This is where it gets confusing because in some industries that is the primary call out. They'll say I need like a 57 or mesh size. They'll call it a mesh size, and you have to this does cross lots of industries and gets very confusing. So even gravel, right? This is how they obviously they're much bigger, but if you go order gravel in different sizes, they're using a screen to separate that.
Right.
So the mesh size, if somebody says I'm looking for a mesh that has a mesh size of 40, we're going to consider that 40 threads per inch. If we're not talking about the same thing, somebody could be saying mesh size thinking pore size, but for us mesh size, a mesh size of 40 says there's 40 threads per inch.
Right. It reminds me of like, you have kids, I have kids, they're in math class and their teacher, marks them off if they don't call out if they just say 37, they don't say 37 inches or 37 pieces. They have to call out, the unit of measure, or they get marked off. This is why, because you grow up and you work in your lab and you need mesh and you say, I need 7 micron mesh. And we tend to confirm, even though most of our customers, they know because they have the specs clearly in the chart, but we do, if they're asking us, we do want to take the opportunity to make sure they're talking about the pore size, since that's the critical spec for our mesh and how we supply it. But yes, if they're crossing over from various industries, we always need to clarify. And there have been times that we've gotten it wrong because we didn't ask the question. So we try to be mindful of that. And when all these specs kind of interact, you could have a couple of mesh sizes that are the same, mesh opening size, but the thread diameter is different. So therefore the open area is different.
And this is actually where it gets, we came in and we said, hey, look, here's a standard kind of offering. There's so many options out there that you have. I mean, they're custom made and but the reality is, same type situation, right? You can say, well, I really want 30 threads per inch, 30 threads, but I want a larger open area. So can we make that, or is it available in a smaller thread diameter? It can be accomplished. Right. I think it's important to also, when we talk about the variations and some of the reasons we carry the sizes that we carry, these are made on huge looms,
right?
And they make thousands and thousands of meters of this, sometimes on a daily basis.
Right.
And so the idea of can I get a custom size? I'm going to just jump out and say, no, you're not going to, unless you're a huge user. And that's generally going to be someone in the screen printing industry. They're not going to use it in filtration. So you're kind of stuck with what's out there, what's already made.
So you're saying the screen printing industry kind of determines these standard sizes
lot of times,
because they're such a big market.
Yes. So generally, if you have this idea and you need something custom, you really should not. I'm not telling you to give up on your dream, but at the same time, you'd be better off to find something that's close enough that's going to work.
But man, isn't that true for every product line? The more closely you can associate or spec your product to what's standard, the more cost effective it is, the more readily available it'll be, the looser the tolerance, and we're not trying to tell you to be scrappy or, but the looser the tolerance is truly, if you can get away with it just for accessibility, if you do not have a critical application, you might as well. And so same is true for the mesh products. We don't often encounter people who can't use what's off the shelf. Typically it's very unusual for us to get a request for some kind of custom weave or something like that. Now, there's some custom work that can be done with these in-house at Component Supply. We do laser cutting, so we can do custom discs and shapes. So you can, if you're creating a filter in-house, we can work with you on that. We do have people who want a finished filter manufactured for them. We don't do that in-house. We do contract that out. And that's been great, especially for, small quantities. We have really great partners that help us with those things. So we also have a few finished products. So we sell the mesh by the linear yard. Really, you can buy a quarter of a yard. But we have like a biopsy bag line that we use. That's fantastic. We have the rosin press filtration bags. And then, of course, we have the lab kit. So just, again, it's pretty expensive to buy some of these small micron, really small 7s and the 18s over here. I think that's what we have. These are they can get really expensive. And so if you're really just not sure, it's nice to have a lab kit around so you can just kind of test a portion of it. But you can't really see. I mean, you can see through it, but you can't see any pore size. It's like holding silk. It is. Versus this one really does feel like the screen that's on your porch.
And interesting, something like this, the loom will produce, if I'm not mistaken, somebody can fact check me on this.
That's you, Stephanie.
I think produces 10 or 12 meters a day. And so, if you think about a loom that's setting up, this thing has 300 threads. I mean, it's so much work. And what happens is they'll get 3 meters into it, and it'll optically find a defect and cut it off, and then they fix the defect, or one of the threads break and they have to start all over. Cut it off, start new. So it's just a very long process to make something like that, and. The reality is it's sort of like the 2G. I need something that's 5, or, has an opening, an ID of 0.005 of an inch, and then you get it and you're like, that's really too small. I think a lot of people grab this and they think, I want to need the smallest mesh, it's the smallest mesh. That's hard to say.
Let's say that 5 times fast, record it and send it to us.
Yes. That you have, and then they get this, and then they say, that's ridiculous. I don't need that at all. What's the biggest size you have? Let's start with that.
Yeah.
So these are some of the issues around looking at products that are so small.
You take it for granted
yes.
until you actually have it in your hand. And I feel like that's so true, again, of so many product lines that we have. I get a drawing from a customer. I put it on my big monitors and blow it up. It's already blown up. And then when I take it to the shop, they're like, Kristin.
Right. It's scaled
Did you already
50
say yes?
to 1. What do you want me to do with it?
Yes. So similarly with the mesh, it's hard to really wrap your mind around how small these pore sizes are until you have them in your hands and you're using them in the application. So we love the lab kits. We have 6 nylon lab kits. We have 3 polyester ones. And so just to circle back on the materials, one of the industries that I like, because I like oysters, is our aquaculture. We do a lot of work with like oyster hatcheries and things like that. And so I tend to move people toward polyester if they're doing a like reusable long-term water exposure, but people use the nylon mesh for that as well.
Oh,
it holds up pretty well.
Yeah.
But if you're truly comparing the difference, polyester is going to hold up longer, from my understanding.
Right. If you go look at, say, again, jump over to aquaculture and you go to a company that sells into that industry, you look for like a plankton net. These are nets they throw behind the boat, they pull across. They're going to be polyester because they're exposed to water so much.
Yeah.
And it is interesting in terms of applications. You've got companies that make the fancy water bottles that have filters in it, and they'll be nylon. And you think, well, but I guess it's not really exposed, submerged that long.
Submerged or like salt water,
right?
Chloride application. So but it's great. It's great to see these products and the different ways they're used. We have a feature on our blog with a woman who works in the oysters. We have people that are buying the biopsy bags, you know, there's like flour sifting. So there's lots of food and beverage application.
Juicing, and they'll use it for juicing.
Yep. Your essential oils.
Essential oils.
So just lots of different avenues for use. And again, one of the things I love about component supply is that there is a lot of cross industry uses, you know, and I think people pull different ideas from different industries. So I think it's good sometimes to get, even if it's not your industry, you're like, oh, that's not really a medical device, I'm going to toss that out. I think if you can have a fuller understanding of the product and how it's been used, you can pull into your application, you can pull into your industry. And so I think, you know, sometimes, yes, our biggest customer base is medical, but we love and are proud of the other industries that we support and hope they can, there are a lot of creatives out in the world.
In the other industries, absolutely.
You think outside the box and think about what you can use these materials for to help your application. So I love that.
Yes.
So we didn't really talk about the metals, the metal screens, but again, those would be even more durable than one of these, depending on the application.
Applications, you know, particularly on the medical side, it jumps into filtration or separation in some of the chemical processing, where nylon and polyester can't hold up, the stainless steel is used in some of the chemical processing applications.
Right. So because we get so many questions about use and exposure to different environments, humidity, even dry environments, we do have some resources on the blog. So we want to encourage everyone to, after this podcast, go look on the Component Supply blog for different nylon and polyester, you know, comparisons. We also have broken out the mesh specs, which again, we encourage you to say 5 times fast anytime 100%. You need a good laugh. But again, it'll tell you about what each of the specifications is and how each one interacts with the others and give you kind of a knowledge of that. But again, we supply mesh by the yard, linear yard. We primarily spec the mesh opening size, so the pore size, actual opening of the mesh that you see, and then secondary would be the open area percentage. But all the specs are listed there. If you need more specs, need more information, need to talk about thickness or some other thing that's not listed, we can help find that for you and navigate that with you. Anything else you want to add about mesh?
No, I would say with this, you know, don't hesitate to call or email or the messaging online. This can be confusing because it's used in lots of different industries, and we can help clarify some of that, and so that, you know, use this as a resource.
We would hate for you to get in a meshy
situation.
Okay, we're just going to call it quits now. Go change the world.